Christian parenting. So, you're having a baby.
I'm Craig Dennison.
And I'm Rachel Dennison. And today on So, You're Having a Baby, we're going to learn all the things and see why doctors are so cool. We've asked our amazing pediatrician to join us to talk all things baby.
Dr. Hillary Lewis is a mom of 3 young children, a practicing pediatrician, and a self-described education advocate. She's a Dallas native, just like Rachel and me, graduating from Highland Park High School after nearly 10 years in Houston for medical school at the University of Texas and residency training at Baylor College of Medicine, Texas Children's Hospital. She returned to Dallas in 2013.
Dr. Lewis is currently practicing at Pediatricians of Dallas and is honored to serve families in her hometown. She believes that educating parents and families is fundamental to the healthy growth and development of children. Accordingly, along with her clinical practice, Dr. Lewis fulfills her passion for teaching with some social media education on Instagram. You can follow along at Hillary Lewis MD, and that's Hillary with 2 L's.
We know that parenting with a newborn is real hard, but Rachel and I are here to help. Well, Dr. Lewis, thanks so much for being here with Rachel and me today on so many levels. We are so excited for this conversation with you.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to talk with you guys today and hopefully provide some encouragement and education to parents that is meaningful.
Oh, it's so exciting. All right, so maybe to get us started, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe talk about your family, how you felt the pull towards pediatric care, maybe even a little bit about your faith.
Absolutely. So I am a Dallas native. I actually grew up here in Dallas and went off to medical school in Houston, where I met my husband. It's a wonderful place to train. We trained in the Houston Medical Center, which is an incredible place to learn medicine and to train. During that time, we had our first child, a daughter in Houston, and then we were so fortunate to be able to move back here to Dallas. My husband is not from Dallas, but I'm grateful that he followed my lead to come here, and I've been here in private practice now actually for 7 years, which is crazy. And we've subsequently had 2 more children, a little boy and a little girl. So we have 3 kids. Our daughter just turned 8 a few weeks ago, and our little boy is 5, getting ready to start kindergarten, and our littlest girl just turned 3. So it's a sweet season. I think both as a parent having young children and then as a pediatrician being able to sort of do this parenting thing alongside my patients and their families, that is a really beautiful thing. And I consider that a blessing to sort of feel like maybe I'm walking through some of the same things that they are as well. And I think truly, as a pediatrician, I realize and believe that children are one of the most beautiful blessings from the Lord that we can have. And so being entrusted with the care of someone's child, I think is this incredible privilege that comes with such a responsibility. And I think we all have those days as parents that we feel totally ill-equipped. And so it's interesting just in this, especially, I think, as you mentioned, in this difficult season, I think I take the opportunity and the privilege to talk and encourage parents. I take that opportunity to encourage parents. I think that's a really, really important responsibility I have. And our local pastor here, we go to Highland Park Methodist Church, which is incidentally the church I grew up in, Matt Tuggle, and he's so wonderful. And he starts out all of his sermons and he says, from the Psalms, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts, may they be pleasing to you, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. And I think about that really, that's something that's really helped me every day as I sort of enter this sort of not only scary season of life, but just every day in practice. And I'm prayerful and hopeful that my words or the way I speak or the way I care, that it is something that can encourage people, that can glorify the Lord, and hopefully point people to Jesus.
I love that. I love hearing your heart behind what you do too, because it's really evident for us as like some of your patients. I was going to share this a little bit later, but honestly, Dr. Lewis, you like changed my life, and I don't think that you know that, but I was really, really struggling when we switched over to seeing you when we left another practice because this one doctor we had, didn't really, I don't know, he didn't really believe in acid reflux and didn't want to prescribe medicine. And Wells, our youngest, was suffering so bad and it was just so hard. I was in such a rut and I just felt like I need a woman, who can really empathize with what I'm going through. And is not going to think I'm weak if I cry. And I remember I just came in and met you and I just cried and you were so encouraging and you listened and you believed me. And I was just so thankful. A lot of my friends were seeing Dr. Lewis and she came so highly recommended as someone who was just brilliant and empathetic and warm. And I can't say enough good things about you. And I'm just so thankful for how you came in and you swooped us up and took care of us when we were really in need. So just to tell you that it's really evident your heart behind what you do.
Well, that really is so kind. And honestly, it makes me feel emotional. I feel so privileged truly to walk along this journey of parenthood, with families. And it's really hard sometimes, right? We see parents go through all sorts of things. And it's interesting. A mentor a long time ago used to tell me, she said, you can't ever stop bad things from happening. You can't stop families necessarily from going through hard things, but you can walk alongside them. And that really has always stuck with me, right? It's such a broken world we live in.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we can't necessarily stop the bad things, but if we can sort of, have this visualization of we're just holding these families' hands and walking along them and encouraging them. And there's such value in that. And so I'm so hopeful that on some level, families know that I care and I deeply want their family to be happy and healthy. And no family feels good when a child is really struggling. I remember growing up, my mom used to say, "I'm only as happy as my least happy child," and I don't. You realize what that means until you're your own parent, right? And it resonates so much, right? You can only be as happy as whoever the least happy person in your family is, and so I take that to heart truly.
Oh, that's so encouraging. There's something I think really important about what you're saying, Dr. Lewis. I've been reading this book that my therapist recommended called Parenting from the Inside Out, which I would highly recommend. That talks a lot about brain science related to parenting for child development, as well as your own journey inside of your development and things you might be able to process and even overcome to a degree that can help you in your parenting. But I just finished reading this chapter that talks about the difference between, as a parent, jumping in to solve your children's problems or being willing to join with them in the midst of their problems and actually helping them solve their problems as a difference. And how tempting it is for me with our 4-year-old to just jump in. If you need something, I just fix it. When what he needs most is for me to empathize and be with him in that and journey with him in that and actually give him the tools that he needs to fix the problems that he can fix, and how much confidence that builds and how much relationship that builds. And I think that I was taking that away too, even to what we're trying to do with this podcast. What I love about what you're saying with what you do for families, and wondering how much we might be able to better join with people and even see the kingdom of God advance if we kind of switched our mindset a little bit from this sense of let's solve all of the world's problems as God's people to what if we joined with the world in the midst of their problems in empathy and love and compassion, and then we're working with the world to the sense of solving problems that are desperately needed. And in that context of loving relationship, we're able to talk about truth and love and how much that applies to families and relationships and our work and these different facets of what we do as a people. So I think that sentiment, at least, is what I'm hearing inside of what you're saying. And I really, really appreciate, I know we felt the fruit of that even in our relationship with you.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, to what you're saying specifically in regards to parenting our children, I think, isn't that just the foundation of what we want our children to develop, this resilience, right?
Yeah.
We
Right.
want our children to be able to go through hard seasons and to be able to have these healthy coping skills, whether it's emotionally or practically or logically, to be able to get through these circumstances. And I think cultivating that, not only resilience, but those healthy skills of emotional regulation and coping is such an important thing, especially in this world where everything is just hyper stimulated for kids. I mean, our children are exposed to so much more than even you and I were exposed to, screen time and media in so many facets. And so I think more than ever, this idea of our children being able to understand that and giving them those tools is so, so important.
Well, okay, Dr. Lewis, there's a million things that I would love your wisdom on. And so we're going to do a little bit of rapid fire round with you because there's just so many things that we don't know until you tell us as new parents. And so I would love to just prep our listeners with like, what would Dr. Lewis do? Or what's like, can you debunk or like demystify some things for us? So yeah, I'm just going to like throw a topic out there and would love for you to tell us like what's right, what's wrong about what's in the news about it, or, you know, social media or whatever, because there's just so much out there, so much information to try and sift through. And I want to start with a hot topic. Vaccines. Can you please tell us just like the benefits of vaccinations and then the common misconceptions about them? Can people delay them with babies? Are there any benefits to that? That sort of thing.
Okay, I am very grateful for the opportunity to talk about this. I think that there are a lot of misconceptions, and I'm truly so grateful when people decide to ask me those questions instead of sort of seeking information on the internet, because it can be really, really difficult to decipher things that you read or things that you hear. And so I think, first off, I would say that vaccines are critically important. They're truly one of the most vital things we can do to protect our children. I think as a provider, having the experience of caring for children with vaccine preventable illness, it is something that you can never forget. And if there's anything that you can do to serve those families that have experienced that and to really do honor to their experience, it's to not ignore the question of, should I vaccinate my child, and really use that opportunity to educate families on why they're important. So first, I really think that understanding the vaccine research, like I said, and being able to decipher the real research from the pseudoscience, it is quite difficult. If I did probably the last 15 years of my life studying medicine and the health of children and vaccines, I would probably also feel overwhelmed when I heard people like Jenny McCarthy talk about vaccines. Mm-hmm. She's actually quite charismatic. And so that being said, I think that having these open and honest discussions with your pediatrician where it's a respectful, kind discourse is so important. And that includes us as healthcare providers taking on that responsibility. I think probably the number one most common misconception is that vaccines cause autism. We know that this is absolutely false, but we don't fully understand autism, and autism is a devastating diagnosis. And I think personally that because we don't fully understand the basis of autism, that has probably fueled some of this fear. But we know that the real misconceptions were actually born out of an article that was published in The Lancet. It's a British medical journal. And the article was published by a man named Andrew Wakefield, who suggested that the MMR vaccine caused autism. And many people know sort of the origins of this. They're familiar with this idea that there was someone who proposed this. But many people do not know that this paper was retracted. Andrew Wakefield admitted that this research was fraudulent. He had falsified his data.
Wow.
The interesting thing is all of the origins of vaccines causing autism were based out of this. But when I talk with people about this, I'm always so surprised at how many people did not know that this paper was retracted. They admitted that the data was falsified and have since had many, many, many studies trying to reproduce any of this, which the studies were not able to, meaning that there was nothing there and has been nothing to suggest that vaccines cause autism. Wow. Again, I think when we have these kind of discussions, what I hope and what I hope parents hear from me is that I empathize with this idea that all of us as parents just desperately want to do the safest and best thing for our child. And I fully understand that the questions and the fear behind this really comes from a place of inherent good. Mm-hmm. I don't think it comes from a place of, I'm trying to disagree with my doctor. I think it comes from a place of, I'm reading the internet and I'm scared and I have this precious little healthy baby and it feels weird to stick them with 3 needles when they're 2 months old. Right. And so it's sort of important as a mom and a healthcare provider to validate that, right? To validate that feeling, but then walk parents through why those fears should not stop them from protecting their child from something that we know is 100% vaccine preventable. The second probable misconception, and there are a lot, and I could probably do a whole 2-hour podcast just on vaccines, but that would probably be pretty. I think the second misconception I hear a lot of is just this idea of big pharma. That big pharma is making a lot of money on vaccines. And the truth is, when you hear the gross numbers of vaccine revenue, it does sound like a lot of money. So, I think the numbers have been somewhere per year on average of $24 billion. But it's important to remember that in context, that is accounts for somewhere between 2 and 3% of big pharma revenue per year, right? This is like $1 trillion industry.
Wow.
Vaccines are not money makers for big pharma. Big pharma makes money on new drugs and fancy drugs, and vaccines are just not a lucrative thing. And I think it's so important to hear, because I do hear that a lot. And when you talk to people about, yes, $24 billion is a lot of money, but this is a $1 trillion industry and it represents literally somewhere between 2 and 3% of their revenue. I think that's really important for parents to hear too. There are a lot of other reasons. And like I said, I think I could walk through them, but usually by the time I get to this point, parents start to feel a little bit better. And then ultimately, and I think this is hopefully just where me being a mom and me having walked through these experiences myself is meaningful. And I truly tell families, I say, listen, I will never, ever recommend you to do something that I would not do for my own children. And I hope that that is meaningful for families to hear. I think it is. And in my experience, it has been. And the second part of sort of that question is the separating or delaying. And I really don't recommend that, because I sort of usually look at them and I say, okay, if you wanted to do that, I don't know which one you want to put your kid at risk for, meningitis or pneumonia or whooping cough. And that's really what you're thinking about, is you're thinking, okay, I'm going to selectively not protect my child against one of these. So I really don't recommend separating them, because the science is just not there that there's any benefit to doing that. And I ultimately just think it puts them at risk for something that they don't need to be put at risk for.
That's good. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Wow. So much amazing information that I've never even really heard. So next topic is formula. And
Yes.
You were like my savior when it came to this, because I nursed Wesley for a year, but nursing just wasn't working for Wells, period. And I was so distraught over that, because I just, you have to grieve that process and be like, this is just not working anymore. And you were what I needed to let myself off the hook. And so can you share maybe some common misconceptions around formula and tell us the actual benefits that exist within it?
Absolutely. And I think firmly, and I believe this, and I say this in the office, and I hope it resonates with moms. And I believe that the benefits of a happy, healthy mom will far outweigh the benefits of breast milk any day. I believe that whatever feeding method you choose for your child, whether it's breast milk or whether it's formula or whether it's a combination of those two, as long as that is best for both mom and baby in your house, that will be what's best for your family in its entirety. I think that breastfeeding is a very emotional experience, and no one sort of prepares you for that part of it. And I think a lot of what makes it such an emotional experience is sort of these cultural expectations. Over the past years, I think the push to support breastfeeding has been so good. But alongside that push, I think we've sort of forgotten about these moms that really struggle.
Yeah.
And we've ignored this idea that, yes, breastfeeding is great, but sometimes it's not. And then on top of that, I think, for example, sometimes your capacity to do what you did with one may be different than what you have the capacity to do with your second or your third child. And each experience is so different. For example, you've got maybe a mom who's had her third baby and she had a really, really difficult time breastfeeding her first two. But that expectation is there. Well, I did it for the first two, but life is different now. And you have two older children to take care of. And the idea that you have this infinite capacity to do exactly the same, even though your life is different and busier, I just don't think that's the case. And so I really try to start with asking moms, what ultimately do they want? What would they like to see things look like? And I think that's a good place to start. I've even had moms literally look at me and they almost whisper, they're like, I don't care about breastfeeding. And it's like they feel like they can't say it.
Yeah.
And I say, hey, I said, listen, what's right for you may not be right for someone else. And what's right for someone else may not be right for you. But ultimately, we want your family unit to be happy and thriving. And so whatever that is, we're going to support that.
All right, so good. So next question. This is something that Rachel and I really struggled with on a number of levels with our two kids, but let's talk about pacifiers. So you hear and read all kinds of things of whether they're a prop you're just going to have to replace, so don't give it to them at the start, or it's this thing that really soothes them and helps you be able to sleep and get rest and helps your child in their development. And so how do you feel about pacifiers, pros and cons, just something that kids are going to have to break eventually? What do you like them for? What do you feel like are some reasons that maybe that parents could steer clear of pacifiers as well?
Absolutely. So I think that somewhere along the line, pacifiers got a really bad reputation. And in my opinion, I think there's a huge difference between a young infant using a pacifier and a 4-year-old running around with a pacifier. And so it's interesting. In fact, some scientific data actually suggests that the use of a pacifier reduces the risk of SIDS, so sudden infant death syndrome. So for nursing moms who want to offer a pacifier, I usually encourage them to offer it once breastfeeding is well established. Now, that time period can be really variable. That can be in the first week of life or sometimes later. But I think it's absolutely okay to do. In fact, all of my 3 kids loved the pacifiers, and I sort of mourned the time that we had to take it away. There clearly is biological data to support that it is very soothing for young children. So early on, I think it's absolutely okay to use. I usually encourage parents to start offering it at nap time and bedtime as the child reaches the age where they're talking more. So somewhere around 12 months, we really want, as your children's language is developing, we really want their mouth free to learn to talk and make sounds. And so I think that's a good step towards starting to wean it, as your child's learning to babble and talk, keeping it in the crib for nap time and bedtime, and then eventually weaning it sometime, probably somewhere between 12 and 24 months of age, depending on the other situations. I think there are clear benefits to pacifiers.
That is very helpful, I think, for a lot of people, because I think it's one of those things where everybody's doing it, but you hear these like negative things about it. And so you don't know if I should even start it, because if it's going to be really hard to break, that sort of thing. Okay, so our next topic is cry it out. This is another thing that you saved my life on. And I know it's a really scary subject for many parents, but we did it with both of our boys eventually. Can you talk about the science behind it and maybe tell us what real risks are and aren't regarding it?
Absolutely. So it's such an interesting topic. And I would start out by saying that I have at least some gratitude for the experience I had now with my oldest child. She is 8 and she's 8 now and she's a great sleeper, but she was a terrible sleeper. And I'm far enough removed from the situation that I can at least show my gratitude for the experience, because I think it really helped me empathize with the parents who go through this. No one has a baby thinking, I'm going to let you cry it out in 9 months and I'm just going to let you cry in your crib till you figure out how to sleep. But we know that healthy sleep habits are so fundamental for young children. And it's so interesting. I mean, there are some kids who just come out and sleep comes really easily. They fall into it, that sleep wake cycle really, really normally. And they sleep long stretches very early on, not necessarily because their parents did anything right or wrong, but just probably because they were easier children. And then there are those kids who really you have to work hard to get them to understand the nighttime, daytime, sleep wake cycle. And those kids are a real challenge. I would say starting out early on in the first few weeks and months of life, I usually walk parents through small things that you can do to sort of set yourself up for a successful and healthy sleep pattern for your child. Sometimes that works really well, and sometimes doing those little things early on really helps, and sometimes it doesn't. And I think specifically, in your experience, it's also hard when you have a really fussy baby, because when you've had a baby that's been fussy because they've had milk protein allergy or acid reflux, or they've just had a difficult first few months, as a parent, most parents are sort of in survival mode, right? So you do you can to calm that child. And so finally, as your child starts feeling better, the hard part about that is that there can be some habits that are really hard to undo, habits that were not born out of anything other than you guys loving that child well and really trying to do everything to make that child feel good. But it can put you in this really hard position when they finally feel better, because all of a sudden, they've been rocked to sleep or walked around with a baby Bjorn on, all day long, every day. And that can be really hard to undo. We know that a lot of the cry it out method is based on a book called Solving Your Child's Sleep Problems. It's a very good book. We know that it is a safe thing to do, but I think the most important perspective I think I try to give parents is I try to remind parents that it's not healthy for your 10-month-old to wake up 6 times in the middle of the night and not be able to sleep through the night. They're not going to feel their best when their night is like that. And I can assure you, you as their parent is not going to feel good. I always joke that I've never met a parent that feels better when they're awake all night. And so, just at the very basis of this, what we always want to prioritize is that your child has healthy sleep habits. As a byproduct, if you as a parent sleep better, everyone in your house is happier. And so I absolutely think that there is a time and a place sometimes for that, but I do not think that it is a one size fits all solution.
Right.
It's really, really important for you to have that conversation with your pediatrician about, hey, how is your child growing? How is your child feeling during the day? How is their development? What does a normal night look like for you? All of those things I think are so important in the discussion of deciding whether or not that's the right thing to do for your family and your child.
I really appreciate that too.
So good.
So babies born different ways, because I think this is another thing that people are really fearful of. For anyone listening, I did a normal vaginal birth with Wesley, and it did not go great, to just put it lightly. Basically, my OB said, if you do not have a C-section with your next one, you could do catastrophic damage to your body. And so I had to mourn that too. I had to really mourn this idea that I was going to have a C-section. I have several friends who were not even given the choice based on their health or based on their body, and they had to have a C-section, and they were just distraught as well. And so there are many opinions on what is better for the baby, and I'm wondering if you could kind of demystify all of that as well. Have you seen any major differences in children born different ways? I'm just thinking if we can help moms feel less guilt in any way about what ends up happening for them, especially over something like this they can't control, that's what we want to do.
Absolutely. And I think that it is so important to talk about. And I think in this era where people think about birth plans and goals for delivery, and sometimes people even will ask me, hey, tell me what you think. And honestly, it's quite simple. I think healthy mom, healthy baby, whatever that takes for mom and baby to be healthy, that's it. And as long as that happens and you're healthy and your baby's healthy, man, that is a beautiful success. And I think that's also where it's so important, I think, for a mom and an OB to really have a good relationship and good trust. I think you should always feel good about your relationship with your care provider, because when you feel good about that, that trust is going to be there on the decision of how you have your baby. And I think that really, I think it's quite simple, and that's that. But I do, and I am aware that there is a lot of discussion about going through the birth canal and the benefits sort of potentially to the gut microbiome and other things for babies that have a vaginal delivery. And I honestly don't talk much with families about that, because most of the time in my experience, most moms do not have a C-section because that was what they chose. I don't find that is a really valuable, affirming discussion to have with a mom, because there's nothing you can do about it. And I think it's generally something that leaves people feeling defeated or feeling like they're a failure. And there's really not value in that kind of discussion. And so I'm usually really, really intentional to remind the mom, hey, I'm so glad you listened to your doctor. I'm so glad you're okay. And I'm so glad your baby's okay. With the medical care that we're able to have here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and I think even in the United States, we're so fortunate to have places where you can deliver a baby healthy, that I just think that whatever it is, C-section or vaginal delivery, if you and your baby are healthy, goodness, that's a beautiful thing.
That's so good. Okay, so beyond the practical rapid fire issues, thanks so much for answering all those questions. I think those are the main things that we're discussing ourselves and have heard from friends or whatever. And so beyond those practical issues, I know every day as well, you're helping parents just simply care for their newborn, seeing and hearing a ton of questions, I would imagine, and concerns and experiences. And so I'd love to maybe shift towards things we might not even know to ask, but think maybe questions that we should be asking, questions that parents should be asking based on what you see most overall as you help families through this season. So is there any sort of encouragement that you'd offer to families? Any questions you think people should be asking? Anything that you just wish that a new parent could know?
Absolutely. I think First and foremost, I think it's important to remember that not all children are ready for the same thing at the same time. So, specifically, what I mean by that is in this era where we all have such a wealth of access to information, right? Information on the internet and books and blogs and sleep consultants. I think it's so important to remember that every child is different and there's not one right time for all kids. I think that so much of let's just take for example sleep, because I think sleep is um, such a challenging thing for most especially first time parents. Is these ideas of 12 hours by 12 weeks and things like that. I think those are great to offer a sort of maybe loose basis for what you can kind of work towards or expect. But I also think that it's a dangerous trap for some parents to feel like a failure because their child's not doing exactly what the book says. And so I really want to encourage parents to sort of talk through these things in person. These are sometimes difficult things just to read in a book or read online. But just reminding, for example, maybe there's a child at 12 weeks old in my office that's been a preemie, that's on the fifth percentile, that's still eating twice a night. Well, certainly that child is much different than a child that's greater than the 95th percentile and is sleeping all night. And how could we ever expect those two children to be doing the same thing at the same time? And then I think it even, that kind of thing even extends on into, that comparison game, which is so challenging, I think, for us as parents, but also us as believers. And I don't think we're called to do that. I think we're really called to be present with our children for who exactly they are, not who their peers are and comparing them. And I think thank goodness that we all have Jesus during the season, because I think that is a really hard trap to get out of. But I just really try to remind parents that of course it's important to continue to touch base with your pediatrician to make sure your child's growth and development is on track, but also at the same time realizing that not all kids are going to do the same thing at the same time, and not all kids are going to walk at the same time and talk at the same time and learn to ride a bike at the same time. And that's okay, because that's what makes life interesting.
That's so good. I actually love that. And it's even for me without a newborn, that's like really good encouragement. Like, because even now I'm dealing with stuff like that with Wesley. Like, so all my friends' kids are swimming, like they're not afraid and they're just like jumping in and they're learning. And Wesley is really cautious and he's had some bad experiences with swimming lessons that have caused him to be extremely cautious, and he's nowhere near swimming. And I've had to be like, you know what? I'm not going to push this anymore. This is not going well for my son or for me, and we're going to wait another year. Like, even things like that, to be like, I'm not going to guilt myself over this, anymore. And I'm going to let him take this at his own pace. And so that's just really encouraging to me even now.
Yeah, I think that's such a good thing. It really is such a good thing for parents that are preparing to have maybe a newborn, maybe for the first time, if you're listening to this. Maybe in our experience, one of the best decisions that you can make in preparation is to learn what you can learn. Like Dr. Lewis is saying, there's great things out there to be able to pull from, but to hold everything that you can loosely, and for sure to not lead your family into beginning that journey of having your family in the context of comparison. Because I think that in general in life is such a source of negativity for us. It actually pulls from our ability to be effective with ourselves or with our parenting in a significant way. And our society is not breeding that, right? With social media, I think we see the highlight reels from other families. And it's really easy when you begin your parenting journey to see a picture that someone posts of their family and you see this really sweet sleeping baby in the middle of the day that looks so cute. And you imagine that, oh, this baby's just always sleeping and it's so peaceful. We've posted on our social media feeds pictures of our kids sleeping sweetly when 5 minutes earlier or 5 minutes later, they're crying and screaming and we're pulling our hair out. So social media is not a good depiction of what's real. And we see that so often. And I think that does breed comparison. And so making the conscious choice to set comparison aside, learn what you can, but have trusted people in your life, like your pediatrician, and really seek from the very beginning to say, what God has asked me to do is to care for this child that he's given me and to tailor my parenting to this child the way that God does with us. God doesn't talk to me or lead me the same way that he does with Rachel or the same way that he does with Dr. Lewis. Are you listening? He tailors his care for me and his leadership in my life to me because he knows me. And so as much as we can model our parenting of our kids after our Heavenly Father and after just what we we know is best for us and best for our kids. That letting go of comparison, I think, is a really key thing you're speaking to.
I think it allows us, when we do that, we're serving our children well and we're serving the Lord well when we do that.
So, Dr. Lewis, last question, something I'm really excited to get your response on this. If there was one piece of spiritual advice that you'd offer parents of a newborn, what would that be?
I think that's a wonderful question. And I think this is advice that for sure I would love to give to a parent of a newborn, but I think it's advice that hopefully would transcend all the seasons of parenting, is just this reminder that there are always going to be difficult days or difficult seasons as a parent. And we will all have those days where we sort of, your kids go to bed and you just feel that feeling of, gosh, I wasn't my best self today and I wasn't my best parent today. And I think we've all felt that. I certainly have. And I always try to go back to that verse from Lamentations that just talks about his mercies are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. And I think that's such a beautiful picture of our Savior. And I think it mirrors just this beautiful innocence that we have with our children, because even when we've had those days, and you guys have probably experienced this with your boys, you know what? Your kids wake up the next morning and they kiss you and they love on you and they move on. And that's what we're asked to do too, is appreciate those new mercies that we have every morning and appreciate that his grace is sufficient for us. And that we hope we can be good stewards of these opportunities that we've been given, both as parents and then, I think too, in practice, is hoping that every day I'm appreciating those new mercies and continuing to try to, point people to Jesus in everything that we do as parents and as physicians.
That's so good. That brings to mind a story really quickly, just to illustrate that. We're in part of Wes's struggles with swimming is that he's really afraid of like closing his eyes and water over his head, and so even bath time can be a challenge right now. And so he was, we were helping him with the bath one night, and I remember in the midst of that, he's just struggling, and at times he's screaming, and we're trying to get over that hurdle with him as graciously as we can. And it'd been days, and he'd stuff all in his hair, and so I had to give him a bath, had to wash his hair. And in the midst of doing that, I remember he said to me, "Daddy, you're not a good daddy," is what he said. Which is just so hard to hear as a parent. It's like all you want to be is a good parent. But I know like right after that, we finished, and it's like as soon as the water shut off, he was like laughing again. And he was so glad. I think we're all so glad it was over. And that night we had maybe the sweetest bedtime we've ever had, at least between me and him, where, I dried him off as gently as I could. And we got in his pajamas. We always read a book and get a hug and a kiss at night before he goes down. And I remember he just wrapped his arms around my head and pulled me down on top of him to give me a big hug and a big kiss. And he said, "Daddy, you're the best, Daddy. I love you so much." And that was like maybe 15 minutes after the screaming event. And so children, there really are new mercies every day. I think there's new mercies every 20 minutes. At least I hope there is with like parenting with kids, especially when that newborn season, offering mercy to one another, because God offers mercy for us, mercy with your kids. Trying to be open-handed with your experiences and move as quickly as you can in and out of them. I think that's such good spiritual advice to apply that verse into our parenting and to try to embody what it means to accept and receive new mercies as quickly and as often as possible. I think that's really powerful.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, on the note of screaming child, I think that one thing that would be really helpful to remember is I think we can all know, we know that screaming children are going to happen. They start right, when they're born, and the screaming will continue in some capacity. And I think it's really important to remind parents that sometimes how you respond to that screaming and how you deal with that is so far more important than necessarily what you do. So it sounds like what you did, staying calm, being loving, being gentle during that time period where sometimes as a parent, we're lost for words. We're not sure what to say, or we feel like, gosh, I don't want to say the wrong thing, or this is challenging and this is hard. How you say it and how you handle those situations, being calm and compassionate and loving, that is what we're called to do. And I think that sometimes even if we feel like we don't have the right words, that how we handle those situations is how we're showing, the love of Christ.
That's so good. Dr. Lewis, thank you so much for joining us today. I loved you before, but now I feel like I have a newfound appreciation for you And I'm just so honored that you would join us. You have been like on my bucket list since we first started talking about this. I was like, we need to get Dr. Lewis on here. She would be amazing.
Oh, well, you're so kind. Truly, I feel so privileged. And every day I feel mostly ill-equipped as a parent. I think that the very last time I maybe thought I had it all together, about 2 seconds later, I got a call asking me if I was coming for my parent-teacher conference. It was literally, I think being a parent is nothing but quite humbling. And I literally remember walking up the stairs thinking, man, I really think I'm handling it all today. And it was like my phone rang like 2 seconds later in my child's school, and they were like, hey, are you coming to the parent-teacher conference? And I thought, okay, Lord, I'm remember that that I need you desperately, and being a parent is quite humbling.
So good. Dr. Lewis, thanks again so much. We're so honored, really excited for us to be able to air this episode, and we're excited for people to be able to hear it.
Thank you guys so much.
Thanks so much to Dr. Lewis for coming on the podcast with Rachel and me. I hope you found that conversation as meaningful as Rachel and I did. To find more content and resources from Dr. Lewis, you can follow her on social media at Hillary Lewis MD. She has some really exciting things about to launch that I just want to tease, and so you're going to make sure to want to follow her so that you can find out when those things are upcoming, more resources for you to be able to get access to. As always, if you're finding this podcast helpful and you're looking for more resources to help you in this space of getting ready to have a newborn or having a newborn already, be sure to get our book, A Parent's Guide to a New Baby, and be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you can get informed when the episodes air and launch. If you found this episode especially meaningful, if you would rate and review the podcast and even this show, that's a really helpful way for people to be able to find the podcast that need it, as well as being able to tell your friends about it if you have friends in the same space that you are. So to find the book, go to christianparenting.org. You can search for A Parent's Guide to a New Baby.
We know that parenting a newborn is real hard, but we're here to help.